Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Balkan Week. This week, rather than talking about a topic in the news, as I often do, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about where to look to figure out what is happening in the region, because I know there's a very big temptation to do things like look at the overall international situation and try to place events in things like relations between powerful blocs in the world and how the region interacts with these, or to look at politicians and the personalities or behavior, activities of politicians, political parties, and who is a head of state and who is the head of party. And very often, I mean, although these things are fascinating, they can also be a kind of distraction. They constitute a kind of gossip. They're a source of trivia, and they disguise the real nature of what is going on in the region, which has to do with social relations and social transformations in the region. So I want to direct your attention at a few of those. And the first thing that I want to point to is the process of modernization and the way that this has been experienced over the last 100 or so years, the way that it continues to be experienced by people in the region. I often say that many of the problems that we see in the region would not exist if it were still possible for people to make a living through agriculture. And that's a little bit of a sweeping statement, but here's what I mean by it. I mean that this was the primary way of life of most people in most parts of the region 100 years ago. And small towns, places that have faded into obscurity, places that have become depopulated, were bustling regional centers. As it became impossible for people to make a living through agriculture, they flowed into the cities looking for work there, looking into industry that never quite grew to have the capacity to employ all of the people who needed employment, going into education, and then moving into a work sector that was never able to accommodate all of the people who were educated for work, in the end into cities that never quite fully integrated the people who moved into them, which is why when people talk about a kind of hybrid or transitional culture in the region, one of the things that they're talking about is the depopulation of the countryside, this incomplete and constantly interrupted transition to the modern world, and the tensions and the frustrations and the dissatisfaction that this leaves. New ways of life emerged that were not consolidated. And it's one of the reasons why one of the things that people make fun of about the period of state socialism is the opening of all of these factories, especially steel mills. The communists were very into steel, that were economically unviable. And they may have been economically unviable, but they provided a center of life and an income and a core for communities that survived. And those communities without those unprofitable investments no longer survive. So as bad as this may have been as a kind of industrial or as a kind of economic policy, it was pretty good social policy. That would have worked well if it had been adequately financed. But coming out of this incomplete absorption is, I think, mutual suspicion between the urban and the rural cultures. This rivalry between the city and the country, we can see it evidenced in the last set of wars in the region, when cities and the diversity of cities and the cosmopolitanism of cities became targets. This was presented as a cultural war about ethnicity or religion, but I think it was just as much a war of revenge of the countryside against what it saw as the source of dominance over it and the source of its destruction. Now, this process goes on, and I'm describing an ongoing process. We can't tie it specifically to the emergence of the early Republican states or the empires or to the communists or the nationalists who came after them or whatever you call the people that you've got now. This process went on during the periods of power of all of these temporary elites. And one of the products of the constant dissatisfaction, regardless of the political form that officially existed, is this ongoing distrust of temporary elites who respond by excluding the public from decision making and from many of the benefits of policies that are adopted, resulting in another factor that we've seen more or less consistently over the last century or so, but increasingly again in the last several decades, and that is the exit of people from the region, be it for economic reasons because they're looking for work, and also for cultural and political reasons because they're looking for more accommodating environments in societies that are more open and more diverse. So what I want to suggest then is look at these long-term historical developments, look at the incomplete process of modernity in the region, look at the incomplete establishment of political legitimacy in the region as sources of rivalry and tension and occasionally sometimes violence. And you'll notice that one set of categories that I did not bring up are categories like nationality, ethnicity, identity, language, religion. These are not core categories. People in different portions of all of these categories are able to live together just fine and do in any number of societies and have over a long time in history. They emerge as dividing forces and as sources of tension and violence only as symptoms of other sources of frustration when they're mobilized by these temporary elites who are also insecure. So these are some things I want to encourage you to look at instead of what people look at generally. And that's been the message for this week. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.